Welcome. Today we're going to be taking a look at Brass Birmingham. This is a 2 to 4 player route building hand management tile placement game where you take the role of one of the Industrial Revolution historical figures trying to expand your empire. You do this by establishing canals and rails, building and developing industries like coal mines, cotton mills, ironworks, manufacturers, potteries, and breweries. You are competing to be the best entrepreneur. How do you become the best entrepreneur during England's Industrial Revolution and win Brass Birmingham? By having the most victory points at the end of the second era. Now that we know what the winning condition is, let's take a look at the components, setup, and how an era round and turn work in Brass Birmingham. Now let's look at the components for Brass Birmingham. We're going to start with the general components. The main game board, which has two sides. There is a day side and a night side. The day side is a little bit easier to read, but the night side looks a little bit more thematic. Then we have the cards. We have wild cards, and then we have location and industry cards. Next we have our resources. You have your coal, which are your black cubes. You have your iron, which are your orange cubes. And you have your beer barrels. We also have our money. And the last general component is the merchant tiles. Now for the player components, you have your player board. You have your character tile. You have your link tiles. You have your industry tiles, which are your square ones. Then you have your victory point tracker, which is the hexagon, the income marker, which is round, and then finally, each person is going to get a player aid. Now let's look at the setup for Brass Birmingham. We're going to be setting this up for a 2-player game. Every time you set up the game, it takes 10 general steps and then 10 player steps. So we're going to start with the general steps. Step number 1 is to choose a side of the main game board and place that in the center of the table. Step number 2 is to remove cards and merchant tiles based on your player count. Step number 3 is to separate and place your wild location cards and your wild industry cards on the board. Step number 4 is to create the draw deck by shuffling the remaining cards and placing them on the board face down. Step number 5 is to shuffle and place your merchant tiles on locations that have your player count. Step number 6 is to place one barrel next to each of your placed merchant tiles. Step number 7 is to fill in your coal market with your coal cubes. Leave one on the 1 pound space open. Step number 8 is to fill in the iron market, leaving both of the 1 pound spaces open. Step number 9 is to create your general supply by putting all of the leftover barrels, coal, and iron cubes on a stack next to the board. Step number 10 is to create your bank by putting all of your money tokens next to the board. Now let's look at the player setup. This takes 10 steps as well. The first step is to take a player mat. The second step is to get 17 pounds from the bank. Step number 3 is to choose a character and then take all of the components of that character color. Step number 4 is to place your link tiles near your player board. Step number 5 is to place your industry tiles on your board, making sure that you put the solid background side of the tile face up. Step number 6 is to place your victory point hex at the 0 on the main game board. Step number 7 is to place your income, which is the circle, at 10 on the main game board. Step number 8, you're going to draw your starting hand of 8 cards from the draw deck. Step number 9, you're going to create your discard pile by drawing one face down card from the draw pile. And then finally, step number 10 is to choose a first player and a player order with your character tiles by placing them on the barrels on the bottom left side of the board. So with this setup, yellow would go first, purple would go second. Now we're set up for a game, so let's go ahead and take a look at how an era, round, and turn work in Brass Birmingham. A game of Brass Birmingham consists of 2 eras, the canal and rail eras. Each era is going to last until the draw deck and the player's hands have been exhausted. This means that each era will take exactly 8 to 10 rounds. In a 2-player game, you will have exactly 10 rounds per era. In a 3-player game, you will have exactly 9 rounds per era. And in a 4-player game, you will have exactly 8 rounds per era. Now, each round will consist of 3 phases. Phase 1 is the player turns. Phase 2 is to adjust your turn order. And then phase 3 is the gain income. Now let's look at how a round plays out. We start with phase 1, which is the player's turns. Each person during the first round of the first era will take only 1 action. After that first round and for the rest of the game, you will be taking 2 actions. For every action that you take, you'll be discarding 1 of your cards. After you've taken your second action, you will redraw from the draw deck back up to 8 cards if possible. If there are no cards left in the draw deck, then what you have in your hand is the only cards you have available. During your actions, if you spend money, make sure to put the money that you spend on your character. When you're taking these actions, there are 6 possible actions that you can take. You can build, you can network, you can develop, sell, loan, and scout. Additionally, you can pass for an action, but you still have to discard a card for each action. Now let's take a look at the 6 types of actions you can use during your player turns. The first type of action is the build action. When you are building one of your tiles on the board, you have to first start off by discarding 1 of your cards. If it is a location card, then that tile has to be placed at that particular location. And if it's an industry card, it has to be a part of your network that you are creating. If it's the first building of the game for you, then that industry card will allow you to place that particular tile on any place that has the same icon. So if it was the yellow player's turn, they could place an ironworks anywhere on the board that you see an ironworks icon. Once you take that card and discard it, you're going to take the lowest level tile of that particular type and place it on the board. So we're going to place this one in Birmingham. You are going to pay the cost next to the tile. So for this one, you would pay 5. Any cost paid goes onto your character. Now also next to this particular tile, you have a coal cube symbol. This means you have to consume 1 coal to build the ironworks. If you need to spend coal cubes to pay for one of your tiles, then you can use coal cubes from any players that is connected to one of your networks. Since we are not, we have to pay the coal market cost for 1 cube. So right now we have to pay 1 to get this 1 coal cube. Paying it puts it back into the resource pool. Once you've paid your cost and placed your tile, there will be effects of the different types of tiles that you see. So for your coal mine or your ironworks, you're going to be placing resource cubes from the resource pool. So for this particular tile, we'll be placing 4 of the iron cubes on that tile. If it was a brewery, you would be placing the amount of beer barrels based on the era. Now, when placing resources on your tile, if it is an ironworks, then you have to refill the market with any cubes that can be placed there from your tile. So in this case, we have to take 2 of our iron cubes and refill the iron market. When we do so, we will be gaining that amount of pounds per cube based on the level of the market you're filling in. So in this case, we are going to be gaining 2 pounds because there are 2 cubes on the 1 pound level. Now, if you had used all 4 of your iron cubes to refill the iron market, or if you had built another industry tile that required the other iron cubes in connection, a part of your network, then your tile for the ironworks would immediately flip over, gaining you a number of income that would increase your income track. Now, if you built a coal mine, the only way that coal cubes would fill in on the coal market would be if you were connected through your network to one of the market locations. If that's the case, then you'll do the same thing that you saw us do for the ironworks and fill in the coal market and gain income based on the level that you're filling in those cubes. Now, there's a couple of special rules that we have for building. If you wanted to build in one of the unnamed farms, you would have to discard an industry card with the brewery icon or a wild industry card and have a connection, a route connection to this particular farm. Also, during the canal era, only one of each player's color tile can go in a location. So yellow cannot build in Birmingham again during this era. They would be allowed to upgrade but not build. Also, during the canal era, you cannot build an industry tile with a black and white circle from your player board, which is right here in the center. Now, if it was the rail era, you cannot build any blue and white circled industry tile. Also, during the rail era, you can have multiple industry tiles in the same location. So if it was the rail era, I could build another industry tile on one of the other 3 spots. When building, you can overbuild. You can build over one of your own tiles with a higher level. When doing this, you would pay the cost and then you would remove the cubes back to the resource pool and the original tile, and that would go back to the game box, and then you would place your higher level tile in that spot. If there are no resources on the board in either of the 2 markets or on anyone's tiles, then you can actually overbuild someone's coal mine or their ironworks. The second type of action is the network action. To do this, you are going to discard a card from your hand, and then you are going to place a link adjacent to one of your industry tiles. If this is the canal era, then you can do a canal on any of the blue lines going out from your location. You would pay 3 pounds per canal. If it was the rail era, then you would build 1 rail link for 5 pounds. Has to be on the railroad track going away from your industry tile. Also, you have to pay or consume 1 coal when you're building 1 railroad link. It is also possible that you could build 2 rail links for 15 pounds and consume 1 of the barrels of beer. There is only 1 person that is allowed to build a single network through each one of these connections. Action number 3 is the develop action. This gets you access to higher level tiles on your player map. You have to discard a card and then remove 1 or 2 tiles from your player map back to the game box. For each one that you remove, you have to consume 1 iron each. Action number 4 is the sell action. This allows you to flip a cotton mill, manufacturing, or pottery tile over. To do this, you discard 1 of your cards. Then you are going to choose 1 of the connected tiles that you have that is connected to a merchant tile of the same icon type. Then you're going to consume the beer barrels indicated, which can include the barrel at the merchant tile. If you use the barrel at the merchant tile, you do get the bonus that is next to that barrel. Once you've consumed the beer, you're going to flip the tile over and advance your income track. Now, you can repeat this process if you have another tile that you wish to flip that is a cotton mill, manufacturer, or a pottery tile. Action number 5 is the loan. You would discard a card and then you would take 30 pounds from the bank and then go down 3 levels on the income track. So if you were at 18, you would go down to 12. The sixth type of action is the scout action, where you discard a card and then you're going to discard 2 of your cards to get 2, 1 wild industry and 1 wild location card to your hand. After every player has taken their 2 actions, then we go on to phase 2, which is the adjust player order. To do this, you take everyone's character and the money placed on them, and then place them in order of how much money they spent that round. So the player who spent the least amount of money would become the first player, and then the one who spent the most would be the last player. So in this case, since purple didn't spend any, they would become the first player, and yellow would become the second. Once you've done that, you can remove the money off of your character tile and place that money back in the bank. Phase 3 is the gain income phase, where each player will gain money based on their income marker. Rounds will continue until the end of the era, which is when all the draw cards and the cards from our hand have been exhausted. At the end of the era, you are going to perform steps. At the end of the canal era, you are going to perform 5 steps. Step 1, you are going to give 1 victory point for each link a player has. As you are giving victory points per the link, you would remove it from the board. Step 2, you are going to score any flipped industry tiles that are on the board. Step 3, you're going to remove any level 1 industry tiles from the board. Step 4, you're going to reset the merchant beer if it was used during that particular era. Step 5, you're going to collect all the discarded cards and shuffle them back to create the draw deck. Once you've done this, players are going to draw back to their 8 cards, and then you're ready to begin the rail era. Rounds will continue until the end of the rail era. At the end of the rail era, you're going to perform 2 steps. These are the same first 2 steps from the canal era. You're going to score 1 victory point per link, and then you are also going to score the flipped industry tiles. Once you've scored the flipped industry tiles in the rail era, you will then compare victory points for each player. And the player with the most victory points at the end of the rail era is the best entrepreneur during England's Industrial Revolution and wins Brass Birmingham.